The best man. Who is he? Why is he so important? And why is that whole film? Well, it all revolves around one political campaign and one fight between two men. Well, to see who's the best. So, in 1964, we arrive as the audience and with the two men at this convention center in sunny Los Angeles. There, William Russell, played by Henry Fonda, and Senator Joe Cantwell, played by Cliff Robertson, are vying for their party's presidential nomination. Each with their own flaws, they nonetheless stand out from all these other candidates in the field, and thus we follow their fight to the top. Okay, that's the spoiler-free version, and then to launch into the spoiler-full version, here we go. The fight continues in the convention center, this big hotel, full of rooms, meetings, and discussions between politicos. Aides scuttle back and forth, and the schemes are launched, all as the sitting president enters the scene. Played by Lee Tracy, he's an imposing old man, the grand figure of the party. The story revolves first around both aiming for his endorsement. That is Cantwell and Russell, both aiming for this president's endorsement. Russell, our protagonist, seems to have both his affection and trust, but not the faith of the president. The president sees him as too weak, a stark contrast with how he views Cantwell. Cantwell is simultaneously building up a mountain of dirt on Russell, but that backfires when his argumentative personality clashes with the president. After this, neither receive his full endorsement, and the battle is truly on in the delegate floor. Both sides' blackmail comes out eventually after we learn that Russell and his team have gathered their own. That blackmail on Cantwell, the key of the second and third act, is an accusation of homosexuality during his time in the Navy. Devastating for any politician of the time, it's presented as especially devastating for Cantwell, given he's the darling of the conservative southern wing of the party. In a tense confrontation, they both agree not to use their blackmail to avoid mutually assured destruction. Interestingly enough, Cantwell puts on such a poor performance denying these accusations. It's quite hard to tell if they're even true. The film leads us to believe they are, but his denials are especially strong. In the third act, as each tries to take the delegates off the other, Russell begins to question the whole process. After tense arguments with those closest to him, including his wife, separated but still supporting him, he decides to pull out of the race in favour of another character, and another candidate, a mysterious third candidate, a dark horse of sorts. Denying the Cantwell the victory at the cost of his own victory is a final act that disappoints some, including his close friends, advisors, and those maybe in the audience, but to many of us could seem as an act made more of selflessness than of pride. He was the one who didn't want to use blackmail. He was the one who didn't want to use dirty tricks. And he was the one who took the step no ambitious man would. Perhaps all of this proves the president right in his initial assessment that Russell was not decisive enough, or hard enough, or mean enough for the job. But he nonetheless seems to save himself and his conscience. Crucially, he reunites with his separated wife, and they stand together, watching the victorious procession pass them by, already forgotten. All of this is made better and more easily understood by the rich historical context that exists around the film. The party depicted is clearly the Democratic Party, which held its own convention in Los Angeles with similar drama just 4 years earlier to this film's release, in 1960, when the film was released in 1964. Many of the characters here in the film are titans of that party, from the writer himself, who's Gore Vidal, to even a sitting vice president in Hubert Humphrey, who makes an appearance. The character of Russell is supposedly based on Adlai Stevenson, the Liberal darling who was the Democratic nominee for president in 1952 and 1956, losing both times to Dwight D. Eisenhower. The ruthless Cantwell is based on the more infamous Richard Nixon, making it amusing twist of fate that Richard Nixon will return to power just 4 years after this film's release, showing perhaps that reality doesn't quite match Hollywood's grace. 1964, the year of the film's release. It's still soon after the death of JFK, and it's the perfect year for this release. The country has seen convention chaos in 1960, and later this year, in 1964, would see chaos again on the Republican side with the nomination of Barry Goldwater. In addition to that historical context, there's also a writing context. Interestingly enough, it's not a standalone work. The Best Man was originally a 1960 play by the same writer, Gore Vidal. The play, which premiered on Broadway, was nominated for 6 Tony Awards and was a top hit. The connections for an audience go past just the writer, though. Lee Tracy, who played the president, was a president in the play and debuted his role in the play to great award, and then the film to even greater award. The style of the story is also interesting, and what makes it vital. The style of the story is also vital to making this an amazing film. After all, making a piece about a political convention interesting is a mammoth task in itself, given almost all of it revolves around drab hotel rooms, corridors, reports, and stuff that's frankly boring to most people. There are 2 key ways in which Vidal and the director, Franklin J. Schaffner, do this. The first is a classic trope, that of an extremely short time span. It's around 24 hours from when we first arrive in Russell to when the last battle is held. 24 hours for the whole story to unfold, from Russell being at the top of his game to giving it all up in just the span of around a day. Then there's another useful trope, the kingmaker scenario. Russell's idealist tendencies and refusal to be a crooked politico in order to win, as well as his stubbornness, means he can't let Cantwell win, but he can't continue. That leads to his decision to place someone else on the throne, giving them power he could not have for himself. There's also a lot of interesting trivia around the film, especially given the cultural references it has. Legend suggests that future Republican American President Ronald Reagan, pretty late in his career as an actor by now, was rejected for this film because some executives didn't think he had the presidential look. Quite ironic, but Gore Vidal, the actual writer, later, in one of his essays attacking Reagan, says that Reagan was considered for the role of Joe Cantwell during preparations. There is some controversy around this, with others stating that perhaps the rejection was for other reasons, but still, the myth is amusing in itself. On a more shocking note, one of the filming locations for this film was the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, California. Shortly after midnight on June 5th, 1968, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated there after addressing supporters on his victory in the California primary, which put him in a solid position to win the party's nomination. The building where this occurred, where lots of this was filmed, is now demolished. That fact around Robert Kennedy sums up best what makes this film so unique. It has great characters, good plotting, and the story is paced excellently from the screen and adapted well. But what makes it stand out is the cultural knowledge and references it's filled with. Gore Vidal, the writer, was friends with or knew so many of the players of that decade. The Kennedys, Nixon, Reagan, all of them. The film is filled with these references, from hints to real cameos like Hubert Humphreys. Reality seems almost adjacent to the story rather than as a basis for it. It's that background and knowledge that makes The Best Man a true classic and a great film.